I'm here at the California Institute of Technology, or Caltech, the famous university which also runs the Jet Propulsion Laboratory part of NASA. India and America have joined hands, are making a fine Earth imaging satellite called the NASA ISRO Synthetic Aperture Radar, a satellite I called, which will help save lives. And I have with me Dr. Paul Rosen. He is the project scientist for the NISAR satellite from the NASA end. There's similarly an expert from India, from ISRO. Whenever India and America have joined hands in space technology, it has resulted in fine science. Dr. Paul, what is important about NISAR?
That's a very difficult question to answer. There's so many things that are important about, I say NISAR, by the way.
That is true. Everybody has a small pronunciation difference for that.
Right. So this is a science mission and an applications mission. We have three main science focus areas on the NASA side. ISRO also is very interested in these global objectives. We're studying the cryosphere, that is the ice sheets and sea ice. That is to understand how they relate to the climate. So it's very much a climate mission. We're also studying the ecosystems, wetlands, carbon in biomass in forests and agricultural areas, again, to understand the exchange of carbon from the ground up into the atmosphere, and again, related to climate. So very much a climate mission. Another objective is in the area of solid earth and natural hazards. So we're trying to understand the motions of the earth below the crust as they're affected by earthquake faults, volcanoes, and landslides, all the kinds of hazards that affect huge populations around the world. So the science we're trying to accomplish is understanding the earth as a system and making things better for humans, saving lives, as you say.
It is. The purpose of the satellite, it's an expensive satellite, we'll come to that, but the purpose is saving lives, and if you're able to save lives, any cost is worth paying. Why are we using synthetic aperture radars for this, and why in two bands?
Excellent question. Synthetic aperture radar is a unique measurement technique. We can control the signal that we send to the ground. That means that we are sensitive to specific things that are different from, cameras, optical remote sensing systems. In particular, the wavelength is very long. It's around 24 centimeters for the longer wavelength radar we have, and around 9 centimeters for the shorter wavelength radar. That means that the signal we're sending is sensitive to objects on the ground that are about that size. So we can see leaves and structures, both electrically and physically, as opposed to optical systems, which look at the chemistry and the color of systems. So it's a very different measurement. We're seeing the world through a radar perspective, which means that we can measure the amount of, for example, biomass in a forest, not just that there is a forest, but how much forest there is there. And we can use this radar signal as a measurement stick, as a yardstick. We can measure the motions of the ground over time to millimeter precision as an image format, so that we can effectively make 3D movies of the motions of the Earth, all the land and ice of the Earth. So it's a very special technique. Nothing in conventional remote sensing can do that kind of measurement.
But why then L band and S band?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the scale size of the wavelength is matched to the scale size of the objects on the ground. So for the longer wavelength, we can see larger objects. For the shorter wavelength, we can see smaller objects. That allows us then to extend the measurement, we say dynamic range, the sensitivity of the measurement to smaller and larger objects. We can see smaller changes in the ground, and we can see larger changes in the ground. So two wavelengths is a much more dynamic measurement than just one.
How complex was it to make this satellite?
Well, we've been at this for 10 years since the agreement was signed between ISRO and NASA. It is a complex endeavor. We have the one thing about radar instruments is that, especially at these long wavelengths, is they're very large and they incorporate not just a separate instrument that is attached to a spacecraft, it incorporates the entire spacecraft. So to make the measurement, we need the spacecraft to perform in a particular way. It has to point properly and it has to fly a particular orbit very precisely. So everything is related to everything else. Nothing can be designed or built independent of the other aspects of the system. So very complex. And we have two organizations, very capable organizations, on opposite sides of the Pacific Ocean. In fact, on opposite sides of the world, literally.
Almost 12 hour difference.
12 and a half, 13 and a half, depends on what time of the year. Yes. Which have very different development methods and processes. And we have to match all of the technical aspects as well as the human aspects of the development over the course of a very complex set of developments. So yeah, it's complex.
And is the satellite in a state of readiness to fly soon?
Almost, yes. It's really getting very close.
India wants to use the geosynchronous satellite launch vehicle Mark II. And in India, we call that launch vehicle the naughty boy. Is that a point of worry? When you started off, there was no launch vehicle Mark III. So is a launch on geosynchronous satellite launch vehicle Mark II a point of worry?
Well, any launch is always risky. That's true for any launch vehicle made by any nation. But we had a set of criteria agreed to between NASA and ISRO as to what would be considered a successful set of steps necessary to be ready for launch. All of those criteria have been met. The last launch of the GSLV-2 was, I think, in April of this year. It was 100% successful in exactly the same configuration that we are planning to use for NISAR, and should be ready. So I don't really have any major concerns about that.
Some people like me too have concerns because it's the world's single most expensive Earth imaging satellite ever to be made at $1.5 billion, and a satellite which took 10 years to make, costing 1.5, and a life-saving satellite for the world. Why not use the launch vehicle Mark III, which is a more reliable rocket?
Well, the decision was made to use the Mark II, as you said, before the Mark III was available. Changing to another launch vehicle incurs cost and more time. As you say, it's urgent to get it on orbit, so it's best programmatically as well as, I think, practically to move forward with the Mark II.
Is there issues of electrical circuitry between Mark II and the satellite, the adapters, or it's just that Mark II was available and used because Mark III is so much more capable as a vehicle?
Yeah, so I'm not an expert on launch vehicles, so I can't really talk to it. I think, as I said before, with any launch vehicle, there are risks. The Mark III is definitely a capable launch vehicle, but it's not risk-free either. And by changing from one launch vehicle to the next midstream, there's all kinds of analysis that has to be done as to whether the spacecraft is properly adapted to that launch environment. Every launch vehicle has its own launch characteristics. And perhaps that work could have been done and we would have been fine with the Mark III, but I think from a risk point of view, one could argue that both are equivalent.
So you're happy with a geosynchronous satellite launch Mark II vehicle?
I'm very happy. Without ISRO's contributions, including the launch vehicle, it's not clear that we would have this mission.
Sure, I'll come to that because that's an important point. And let's come straight to that. How did it happen that NASA and ISRO decided to do this synthetic aperture radar for saving lives on Earth?
It's a very long and interesting story, but I'll try to make it brief. NASA had been attempting to find a way to launch a similar system since, I don't know when, maybe 1994 was the first time we proposed
94.
it. First time we proposed it was 1994. More recently, in 2007, there was a National Academy study that said this mission should be done. We started looking at it, and NASA simply could not find the resources to do it at that time. They said, please find a partner. So we went around the world looking for partners, and we worked with several different countries looking for a way to go forward with it. In 2011, I was asked by my management, who had already worked with ISRO on other projects, to go to India and talk with people about the mission. I gave a talk about what our concept was, and it was instantly embraced by my colleagues in ISRO. And after that, it took a couple of years to get NASA and ISRO to agree to it at the government level. But officially in 2014, they signed the agreement, and the rest is history.
Yeah, I remember it was General Charles Bolden and Dr. Radhakrishnan who inked that agreement, and then since then it's been in the making, and we are very close to the launch now.
Yes.
Now let's come on to some of the possible uses of. You did address a little bit about the climate change. Let's look at the solid Earth, and let's go down one by one. How will a satellite help in detecting earthquakes?
Yeah, so we can measure the motion of the ground down to millimeter precision. So imagine that we are flying over the Himalayas, and the tectonic plates are moving together. The Indian subcontinent is moving underneath the Himalayas, pushing the Himalayas up. These are very difficult to observe measurements by eye, of course, because you're looking at very small changes until an earthquake actually occurs. So what we are measuring, every 12 days we fly over and cover the entire Himalayan region, in fact all of the world, every 12 days, from the ascending portion of the orbit as well as the descending portion of the orbit. So using this special technique of using the radar as a yardstick, we can make a measurement of the motion of the ground to millimeter precision over time. So that allows us then to see how the Himalayas are moving. Now, most people would argue that we cannot predict when an earthquake is going to occur. However, we can certainly observe those motions and how they progress from before an earthquake to the earthquake itself, and then after the earthquake, how the earth adjusts. That knowledge of the earthquake cycle, pre, co, and post-seismic, as we say, that knowledge of the earthquake cycle allows us then to better understand how the stresses are adjusting themselves, where the likelihood of the next earthquake might be. And by measuring this over time, we can get a good sense of just the physics of the earth and the risks associated with earthquakes.
Sure. In India, we are very worried about a large magnitude earthquake striking north of Delhi, and some people say 8 or a 9 magnitude earthquake will strike north of Delhi because that fault has not broken in a long, long time. And if that happens, that's a very risky affair. That's why a satellite which will save lives.
Yes.
What about landslides is going to be, because of late with developments in the Himalayas, landslides have become an issue. Will that be a point to monitor?
Yes. Again, we can measure these motions down to millimeters, and landslides often have precursory motion. Before they actually slide, one can see that they are moving. And in particular, the two radars we have, the L and S-band radars, have these long wavelengths which allow us to see persistently over time the motion, even in areas that are traditionally difficult to measure because of the shorter wavelengths that they have. If you're looking at the leaves of the trees and not looking at the ground, you can't see the motion of the ground so much. So we're seeing the ground with these radars, and so we can see, we have many examples from airborne systems and others at these long wavelengths. We are able to see the motion of landslides before they actually catastrophically slip.
See, of late there is the concern, glacier melt is one concern, we'll come to that, but there's also concern on glacier lake outbursts, gloughs, and we recently had one in Sikkim which caused havoc. So is that also on the radar for the two radars which will be in space?
It is, in the sense that we are making continuous measurements over time. So any glacier that is observable on land, which would be all of them, we will be measuring their motion. And if there's any indication of an acceleration or any weather conditions that might be changing to affect the likelihood of a glough occurring, we should be able to measure that.
And you said climate change. Just expand that a little for me. How would you assess carbon and the climate change issues using this satellite?
So when it comes to carbon, one of the least well understood aspects of the carbon cycle is the contribution of the above ground biomass, that is forests and savannas and things like that, to the carbon cycle, how it's controlled, how the carbon goes from the ground through the trees up into the atmosphere. There's a lot of dynamic change of this, of course, as well, due to natural forest fires and, of course, man-made changes in burning of forests for use in agriculture and then agriculture itself. So by measuring on a regular basis these changes, these are then boundary conditions on models of carbon exchange. And there are a number of models that have shown that by measuring at the size scale, the sort of the field scale size, in a continuous sense over large regions, we'll be able to reduce the error in our knowledge and our climate modeling skill by order of magnitude using this technique. So that means then we will be able to understand the carbon cycle and how that and reduce the errors in the climate models.
Will this data be in public domain, or will it be only available to scientists at JPL and ISRO to analyze?
I just had this conversation with my team not 40 minutes ago. The data will be placed in the public archive almost instantly after it's acquired and processed. Unlike many missions which do hold on to their data, this data is going to be public. All of NASA's data is public, and NASA and ISRO have agreed that this is a science mission and all the radar data at all levels will be made publicly available.
So PIs won't get a one-year lock-in?
They will not, no.
How will you publish your papers? You'll lose out on everything, Paul.
There will be so much data and so many things to study that will not be a problem.
There's one more question which people ask me. In this, since it's a joint mission where NASA and ISRO are working together, is there any technology transfer which has happened from ISRO to NASA and NASA to ISRO? Or is it that discrete elements have been done by both agencies and then they have been put together?
It's effectively the latter. We, of course, learn from each other, but we have, governmental rules on exchange of technology. So it was set up to be very much a parallel activity, and ISRO's technology is quite advanced, so they don't really need help from us, and we feel we're advanced too. So we have developed two radars which have exactly the same functional design with completely different technological solutions, and they both seem to be performing beautifully in testing. And I think they should perform very well in space as well. The launch vehicle, of course, is all ISRO. The spacecraft bus is all ISRO. So,
and the management of it?
The management, of course, is parallel with documents that describe how we can work together and what the interfaces are. So everything was very carefully planned so that we could work in parallel, and then when we brought things together, they would all come together nicely. And there's a great example of that. We built part of the structure for the instrument mechanically, shipped that to India. They put all of their electronics boxes onto that structure. That all worked. And then they shipped it back to us, and we mated it with our structure. That all worked mechanically. There were some electrical issues that we had to address, electromagnetic issues, but we addressed them as a team. So it's been a great partnership, I have to say.
Yes, it is a great partnership. And like I said in the beginning, whenever India and America have partnered in space, it has resulted in some fine science coming out of it. There's a question which begs an answer. See, the NASA component is costing about $1.2 billion. The Indian component, which includes the launcher, which is an expensive business, is going to cost only about $300 or $400 million. Why this difference in cost between NASA and ISRO?
I can't really comment on ISRO costs. I don't really know what goes into those costs. All I can say is that it is a complex system. It has an enormous amount of data. It requires an enormous amount of power, and it's a physically large structure. So it is reasonable that it costs a lot of money for both countries. If you look at the cost per square kilometer of the data, it is incredibly cheap.
What is that?
It's around 2 cents. That's 2 US cents per square kilometer.
Per square kilometer of land area or per square kilometer of the Earth?
Of land area on the Earth. That's because we are taking hundreds of scenes of each square kilometer over the life of the mission. So if you consider how much data we're taking, and then divide the total cost by the square kilometers, it comes out to that kind of a cost. So it's really very cheap. If you were to buy commercial data, generally it's quite a bit more expensive than 2 cents per square kilometer.
That's very nice. And when you add to that, you'd be helping save lives.
Yes.
It becomes an even more mission which is more approachable for people to embrace.
Yeah.
Is that factually correct?
Yes, I'd say so.
Now, beyond the launch, there's a lot of data which would be coming down. Are both institutions prepared to handle that kind of data?
Again, I can't speak for ISRO's preparedness. Every time I go there, we talk about it. I've seen their facilities, and I'm quite impressed by them. So as far as I can tell, ISRO will be prepared. From the NASA side, we have done end-to-end testing of everything, including simulating data of similar volumes in large quantities and running it through our processing system. And yeah, we should be able to handle it.
Is it correct that this is going to be a very large unfurlable antenna which will be used? And what is the size, and is it really the largest of its kind?
It's a 12-meter diameter, unfurlable gold mesh molybdenum antenna reflector. The antenna itself is the reflector plus the electromagnetic radiator that's on the spacecraft itself. Whether it's the largest, it's certainly the largest in low Earth orbit. There was a 6-meter version that was flown on the SMAP mission. That's about half the diameter. This is certainly the largest in low Earth orbit. I think communication satellites have larger versions of this.
Was it difficult to do?
So the reflector itself is built by a US contractor that has done many of these before. It's a heritage design, so difficult. The design was already in place. It's a matter of manufacturing and testing. So it's a complex system, but it was something we knew how to do already. The boom, which is a 4-jointed structure which holds the reflector away from the rest of the satellite, that was a new development, and it required quite a bit of engineering and testing. It's quite sophisticated with composite fibers so that it's very stiff, but also light. A lot of cables have to go from the spacecraft up into the boom. So it was a challenge to build. It was also done in parallel with another mission called SWAT, which used a similar boom technology. So there was synergy in that development. And we had an extremely complete testing program to make sure that it would work in all the different environments. So we're quite confident. It was a challenge to do, but we're quite confident it will work.
How difficult or easy was it to work with engineers and scientists at the Indian Space Research Organization?
I'd say easy. The scientists were very welcoming and open. I've been to India now 30 times over the last 10 years, 12 years. And every time we have very productive meetings. Engineering-wise, I think also everyone has been very willing to try to accommodate the different development styles. I know that NASA's process is very heavy on paperwork and on process. India's process seems to be a little bit more dependent on the individual, not so much on the process, which I think is really quite admirable. Everybody has to be really capable at a lot of different things in order to be able to work that way. So the differences in the style, I think, have led to some challenges in development along the way, but it's always been resolved, and we have, I think, the result will be the satellite, which is beautiful to look at and is functioning very well in all the tests.
Excited about the NISAR mission?
I am very excited about the NISAR mission. I've been waiting for this mission for 30 years, and I've been working explicitly on it for 14 years on this particular version of it. So yes, I cannot wait for the data.
And when it's launched, will you be celebrating with peanuts? I believe you sent some peanuts from JPL to Sriharikota.
Absolutely. I will be celebrating with peanuts and whatever the tradition is at ISRO. I don't know what ISRO's tradition is, but
ISRO has many traditions. You'll have to go to a couple of temples alongside. It could be a fun experience for you. If peanuts can be one way, then praying at a temple could also be some fun for you.
I look forward to that.
And is it going to be looking at data and providing data to other countries as well, or only looking at the mass in North America and India?
No, we have global measurements. All land, all ice-covered surfaces of the Earth, the coastal waters around India, and the coastal waters around the US as well. So comprehensive coverage, and as I said, the data is freely open to the public. Many people go to the NASA archives globally to find remote sensing data. It'll be no different for NISAR. It's all available to anybody.
Thanks a lot for speaking to me. Look forward to a successful launch of the NISAR satellite on the Geosynchronous Satellite Launch Vehicle Mark II. Hopefully, the naughty boy will behave itself and help save lives on Earth through the satellite. So that was a little peek into what is really the single most expensive Earth imaging satellite ever to be made, and beautifully being made by the world's oldest democracy and the world's largest democracy. And every time in the past, whenever the two have worked together in space technology, it has resulted in some fine science. Chandrayaan-1 being one example, where instruments from US were flown by ISRO and led to the discovery of the presence of water molecules on the surface of the moon. It changed the lunar geological history. Will NISAR change the understanding of Earth and Earth systems and help save lives? A lot of credit will have to go to Paul and his team, and so also to the team at ISRO, which have been working very hard for this satellite. from the California Institute of Technology, which runs the Jet Propulsion Laboratory for NASA, which is building the American component of the NISAR satellite. In Pasadena, California, Pallava, Bagla for NDTV.